Hello, good afternoon. So today I want to talk about the Nigerian inflation, December inflation numbers as given by MBS. So first, in 2024 we had a rebasing in January, and the rebasing was basically changing the reference year from 209 to 204. I already did a video. So prior to December, the other inflation figures that had been released. So when you're rebasing, the rebase year that you pick, your reference year, you assume that the inflation at that year is 100% because you are starting at, that's like 1. Inflation is like 100%. So whatever value you are now using afterwards, so if it increases by 10%, it's 1.1. That's like 10% of the initial point. So that's your initial point, 2024. So 2024 as your reference point, increasing, you now be checking the increase from that 2024 to the year you're comparing to. What's the increase? If it's 10%, it means it increased 10% more than that of 2024. So initially, according to them, what they said, because they had to change the methodology a bit, that's what happened. So what they were saying is that as opposed to using, I said you're going to use the reference year CPI number as 100%. So they use the monthly. So if I'm calculating for November, I use November 2024 data as 100%. So what they now did in December, the result that they brought, because they saw that if they had used that for December, there would have been a spike. The inflation number would have been like as high as 31%. And you and I know that between 2024 and this year, actually inflation did not increase by 31%. Let's be fair. Maybe prior to, but between, you pick anything. Maybe pick a food price. Maybe except rents. Yeah, rents may have increased. But pick a food price. Between 2024, let's say rice in 2024 and rice in 2025 December, obviously it did not increase by 100%. If anything, it even dropped. So that was why they knew that it will not get true value. In fairness, a lot of analysts, when they did the rebasing, already said that was going to happen. So I guess that's why analysts were like, we told you guys now, why, and you still continued. But so to manage that, they recalculated all over from January down to December using the average. So they set the average inflation figure for 2024 as the 100. So 2024 ends year results was used as the 100%. CPI for 2024 ends year result was used as the 100%. So everything was being compared to the average value of 2024 results. So if you say it's 15%, it means it increased 15% from the 12-month moving average of 2024. So that's why it's a difference. So whatever you're seeing initially, they showed you the value that it would have been initially if they had used that, because they released two figures. They showed you what it would have been if they had continued, and they showed you what it is now with the recalculated value. So with the recalculated value, December 2025 headline inflation, that's inflation, entire baskets, increase of prices of things in the entire inflation basket is 15.15%. Now, if you're using, because if you're comparing something, you have to compare apples for apples. It's like you want to come to Lagos and you want to compare house rents, and you compare house rent of Ikorodu and Lekki phase 1. Some will be like, somebody goes to Ikorodu and say, house rent is 600 there, and say, and somebody else say, one bedroom here too is 1.5 million or is 4.5 million. Somebody that doesn't know, that's not been to Lagos, or I've not heard anything about Lagos, will not understand why. So they might be like, why? But this person told me 600. So you need to put things in perspective. So when you're comparing the December, or we're comparing with the one that was used, the same methodology to calculate. So the new methodology says 15.15 for December, but it said it recalculated November as 17.13% using the using the recalculated methodology, using the new methodology, showing you that actually you had a drop. So even if I'm saying 15, whereas I told you 14.43 last month, it was actually a drop, because from recalculation, last month is supposed to be 17.33 using the new methodology. So all in all, what I was telling you that you saw a drop. That's what we're looking at, like what actually happened in December. As opposed to looking at the specific numbers for this one, you should be looking at what exactly happened and compare it to your own reality. Did you see a spike in price, even though it's December, from November to December? Maybe because people, even especially for food, people knew that a lot of Nigerians didn't really have much purchasing power. So if you had increased any further, you would have eaten your food. That's the basic truth. You'd have been the one to eat most of your food. I saw a write-up about somebody I was talking about sales of, is it cars or something? Businesses were selling less. So there was actually because there was no demand, prices had to drop. It's demand and supply. So there was actually a decrease in December compared to November. Yeah, I would have thought that maybe because it's December. But food prices, as opposed to what we always say in December, food prices actually did not spike in December. Things like tomatoes actually increased, as opposed to what we'll see like decrease, as opposed to when we'll see increase normally. So we saw decrease in food prices. And if something like tomatoes is what you used to cook rice, jollof rice, smoky jollof rice, used to cook stew, and everybody used it in December. So if something that is consumed a lot at that time reduce, you can imagine the significant effect it will have on food prices. And food prices carries 40% of the baskets. So yes, two things led to the decrease. Some food item actually dropped, while others even stayed stable. We did not see increase. I don't think I saw increase in chicken, because at least a lot of us use chicken and beef. We didn't really see increase in things like that. And then food prices also remain stable. Food prices dropped for some items. Remember, we are still in the harvest season, so yeah, we have not gone to the planting season. So that also impacted why food prices are remaining stable or seeing a slight drop. Another thing is Dangote also reduced the price of crude oil. PMS reduced from around, I know I bought almost 900, to when it reduced it to 738. Some people were still, I think I bought around 800 of recent. I know it has dropped down. I'm seeing that some filling station are even selling at 735, lower than its 739 prices, but the price went down. So, and that affected the thing with why we always look at energy or PMS prices is that it has a trickling effect. Every form of services or products that you do in Nigeria involves you transporting it. People that, if you have a generator, or if you have a business that you power with a generator, you are going to use PMS. So if you see crude oil price drop, it means that your cost of production would also drop. People that transport goods also, it will affect the cost of transporting goods. So if we see PMS prices drop, what it automatically means your transport fare would reduce, logistic fare would reduce, which will affect the cost price, because logistic fare plays a high impact, contributes a lot to actually the cost of goods and services. You'll be surprised, especially because you're seeing that most of our goods are coming from the north down to the south, and so that's huge transportation costs. Most of the time also affect. I hear that post-harvest losses for most of the products in Nigeria are like 40%. So if you are reducing things by 40%, if you are losing 40%, it means we still have opportunity to reduce the prices of our goods and services if we can be more efficient or effective in transporting those goods and services. Logistics costs also plays that effect. So those were the things that caused the drop: energy prices and food prices. Now let's go to the specific. Now, headline inflation, I said, was 15.15% compared to 17.33% of November. That's a drop. Food inflation was 10.3. Food inflation was 10.8 compared to 14.2 in November. So you see that food inflation actually dropped. Core inflation, which where you remove farm produce as more of food produce, farm produce and energy, you actually see a drop, but it's still at elevated prices, 18.6 from 20.6. Core inflation will look at things other than energy, and we look at things other than food. So maybe you look at things that are more stable, that you don't increase every so often, that are not so volatile, maybe like rents. But you see why it will remain elevated. If you are looking at if housing is part of this, if telecoms is part of this, you see that there have been tariff. The tariff on telecoms was increased, so they increase their data cost. So you can imagine that those data costs are still significantly high. Although it's stable, it was the increase between what it was before its increase was very sharp. So we are still seeing those high increase. But months between November and December, we are seeing that there was actually a drop in the value year on year. Month on month, that's comparing November. What we were comparing for was year on year. So you are comparing it with 2024 value. Now we are comparing, so you compare November 2024 to November 2025, and then you compare December 2025 and November 2024. That's what you are doing on year. But when you are doing so, the fact that I'm looking at both data does not mean you have to get what you are comparing. If you want to know between November and December what is actually moving, you are looking at month on month. So it's looking at between November and December, how did the movements look like. So month on month, so on a month on month basis, headline inflation dropped to 0.54% in December 2025 from 1.22% in November 2025. So it's telling you that the rate of increase in inflation is actually reducing. Inflation is increasing at a lower rate when you compare that of November and when you compare that of December. It's actually it's actually dropping or increasing at a lower rate. Well, for me, I feel there's a bit of truth in that, saying that there's a bit of stability in the prices of things that we are seeing. We are not seeing prices of goods and services spike as high as we used to see. There's a bit more stability, so we are seeing slower increase in inflation rates, or which means that slower increase in inflation rates. The way inflation rate is increasing, the way price of goods and services is increasing, is slowing down. You can confirm from yourself if price of goods and services on your own side is slowing down compared to maybe last year or last 2 years. We've seen a bit more stability, and so we have seen between November and December, we see a slower increase in headline inflation. When you look at food inflation for month and month, food inflation was 10.8 year on year. Then on month, it fell to 0.36. It's negative 0.36. That means there was actually a drop from December. The prices, and you can see the prices as December of a bag of rice, December 2024 was like 100,000. Now bag of rice had dropped to almost 60,000-70,000. So there was a negative. It was a negative value compared to November, where we saw an increase, where we saw 1.13. You see that food inflation that's to tell you that food is actually not increasing. Food is decreasing, maybe at a slower rate than we would expect compared to what we had, but it's actually decreasing significantly. For it to be negative, it's actually decreasing a bit when Nigerians come for me. But your rice price, your tomato. I bought tomatoes. They are really fresh tomatoes and they were cheaper. So yeah, I can say that. And the pepper too, I can say of that, And maybe chicken stayed the same. At least it didn't increase, So yeah, so that is it. For core inflation months and months. Core inflation, like I said, core inflation removes food, farm produce, and energy. It stood month on month. It was 0.58 for December compared to It was compared to 1.28% in November. So we are seeing that the rate at which goods and services were increasing in the months of December of 2025 we're actually slowing down. So we saw a slowdown in growth, in increase in prices of all the things in the basket between November and December. So we actually saw a decrease. Like I said, forget the methodology, look at the values, because if I'm using the same, if I'm doing, how do I put it, if you want to do a race, if your start point is the same, if you want to compare a marathon, you use a start point, 100 meter, 200 meter. 200 meter is constant wherever you measure it. If your tape is constant, so if I'm measuring it in Nigeria and I'm measuring it in the UK, because I'm using the same tape, 100 meter is 100 meter everywhere. Yeah, that's why people that sell markets, when they use weighing scale, they can get the same price, because 1 kg is 1 kg, so long as the scale is not acting abnormally. So it's the same thing. Do you get? So if you are using the same, so forget the methodology, so long as you are using the same methodology to compare, you can infer from those data what is actually happening. So in essence, look at the data. What's it telling you? What you are interested in is it increasing? Is it decreasing? Is it constant? Is it slowing down? By the data they are giving you. That is what the data is telling you. You can confirm from yourself in your house. The food stuff, are they increasing? My rents, am I still seeing significant increase? Then that's why if you look at it that way, remember that food inflation is 40%. So you have to know that the power of food inflation on your data, 40% is actually quite high. So if you have one item with 40%, it should give you an indication of how the inflation data is actually going. So good food inflation and energy inflation is actually gives you a good idea of where inflation data is going. I know for people that use public transport, they'll be like, what do you mean energy or transportation is reducing? Because I had somebody say public transport they actually did not reduce in December. But people that drive cars would actually see this. I know that I bought fuel at a lower price. I bought PMS at a lower price. So imagine somebody that's doing transportation business, they are buying at a lower price. Maybe for individuals that are going, the public transport sector did not reduce the price. Hopefully we would see how that sector can be regulated, so that at least the common man actually gets effect. Because if you see a drop in price, a lot of people use public transport, so we want to see that price. We want to see that price effect. So also, as we call ourselves out in social media, as you're calling the government, when you see that they have reduced energy price and they're still charging high price in public transport, you should call those guys out too, because you should see a reduction. They are seeing a reduction. Because anybody, even me that don't use public transport, I'm still seeing a reduction in price. My cost has reduced. So their cost has reduced, but they have refused to reduce their transportation costs. And there's a public sector, a private sector that the government might not have access. I'm not speaking for the government, but I'm just explaining inflation, what is happening. Do with it as you will. So so when you talk about so urban inflation and rural inflation, that's another data I like to look at. Urban inflation figure dropped to 14.8. Rural inflation figure dropped to 14.56. So in the rural areas, in the urban areas, what were the inflation? So we see that urban is still slightly higher than rural. It's good to know. In November, I think we saw a higher increase in rural inflation than urban. So it's actually good to know, because I think the purchasing power of people in the urban area might be lower than the purchasing power of people in urban area. Now, the states that had the lowest inflation figure was actually Sokoto at 8.61. I'll put this data so you see it. Sokoto had an inflation rate of 8.61. So somewhere like Adamawa had the highest inflation figure was actually in Abia, where Abia headline inflation was 19.03. That's why when you see that we complain about inflation, different people have different experience. So if you are in Abia, what I'll be saying, you'll be like, what is she saying? You get compared to somebody that is in Sokoto. Those of us that are in Lagos that had a data of even 17.45, you see that although the actual headline inflation is 15.15, when you now look at your states, so those are things you want to look at because it will affect people differently. The way somebody in Sokoto will be affected by cost of goods and services, it will be different from the way somebody in Abia, and will be different from the way somebody in Lagos, because they now bought it statewide. So they are picking goods and services in different states and looking at the change in prices and telling you how it's affecting. Some people would say that these prices are very, that's how you know how a state is expensive or not. Abia is actually the highest at 19.03, and Adamawa is 13.34. Like I said, Sokoto is 8.61. If you're in Sokoto, you can confirm if your prices of goods and services is increasing as much as not. They just put the data. You on your own can use, somebody did something of recent where they compared the prices of what they bought in 2020 or 2022 and now, and they saw like 5 times or 6 times increase. You can do that in yourself. You can simulate headline inflation or food inflation, which is easy for yourself, and then that's like 40% of the inflation figure. You can use, if you do 40%, estimate what it will be 100%, from 40%. That will give you an idea. You would see, and that will give you an idea. So that is it. For January, we're still looking at the data. I'm sure they will still use this. Hopefully they will not. They'll stick to this average, and then the rebasing would smoothing out, and the high points will smoothing out, and we'll get the right figures, hopefully. So like I said, when you see the data, look at is it increasing, is it decreasing? Then look at the percentage, gives you an indication of the rate of increase, and then look at your own food stuff. Everybody eats, everybody goes to the hospital, everybody uses transportation. Look at it. Like I said, for people that use public transport in December, when they tell you prices decrease, you might be like, but for people that actually use private vehicle that bought fuel, they can actually tell you that yes, in the pump price actually increased, even if maybe the private sector did not reduce their prices. Okay, so that is it. Thank you so much. I hope you learned 1 or 2 things. I hope the video was good. So have a nice day. Bye.
If you found this video interesting and will like to learn more, contact us on Instagram at Magda Premier Innovations Limited or WhatsApp at 0816 029 7117.